It has been my pleasure to partner with Grant Thornton on today's program, The New Reality of Post-Pandemic Work. For the first 25 minutes or so of today's discussion, we will spotlight our panel and moderator to record their comments. Spotlighting is what you see now, where the speakers are larger on the screen. And after they make their primary comments, we will then stop recording and spotlighting so we can all engage in open discussion. At that point, you will see all participants on the screen. To contribute to the conversation, you can speak up, physically raise your hand, or ask a question or share a comment in the chat box. We invite you to stay for networking at 10:30 a.m. when we will break out into smaller Zoom rooms for about 30 minutes. By now, you've likely heard about the NACD Directorship Certification, which is all online, both the education portion and the exam. To date, more than 250 members have certified nationwide and more than 30 from the Texas TriCities chapter. If you are interested in learning more about NACD Directorship Certification, there is a link in the chat box. Without further delay, I'd like to introduce our facilitator this morning, Rashada Whitehead. Rashada is the head of culture, diversity, and inclusion for Grant Thornton. She leads the teams responsible for developing and implementing Grant Thornton's firm-wide culture transformation, diversity and inclusion, and alumni relations strategies. Outside the firm, she is an adjunct professor and has taught cultural competence for the University of Chicago Graham School of Continuing and Liberal Professional Studies. Rashada is not only navigating COVID-19 as a leader within people and culture, but she's also a working parent, a crisis communicator, and a reputation manager. Thank you, Rashada, for contributing to and facilitating our discussion this morning. And I'll turn it over to you, Rashada.
Thank you, Sherry. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We are looking forward to a really rich discussion today. Sherry has already done an introduction of me, so I will not belabor. I am really excited to introduce our two panelists and speakers for today. Just a heads up to all of you all, if I happen to look away here or there, it's just because I have notes all around me to sort of keep me on task with what we're going to be talking about today. But first, I want to introduce Ellen DeSanctis. Ellen is the Senior Vice President of Corporate Relations for ConocoPhillips and also the Director of St. Agnes Academy. She has more than 40 years of experience in technical, strategic, and communications leadership in the oil and natural gas industry. She provides overall guidance to ConocoPhillips investor relations, communications brand, charitable investments, and corporate event functions in support of the company's mission, values, vision, and strategic objectives. She began her career as an engineer, later working in communications and financial roles, and she also is a past president and board chair for the Girl Scouts of San Jacinto County Council, and remains an active member of the organization. And as I mentioned earlier, she currently serves on the board of directors for St. Agnes Academy. So welcome, Ellen. And then we have Alessandra Yockelson, who is a Senior Vice President, Chief Talent Officer, and Global HR Executive for Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. She has a background in major multinational brands, of course, including HP, Enterprise, Diageo, Avon Phillips, and Volkswagen, and deep experience in digital transformation, mergers and acquisitions, human capital management, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Alessandra brings an understanding of strategy, development, and how organizations leverage technology to better compete. Her human capital experience is built on a 25-year plus career of increased responsibility and leadership roles in the US, in the Netherlands, and in Brazil. She has been a catalyst for diversity throughout her career, served as the president of the Avon Foundation for Women in Brazil, and is a recognized thought leader in establishing data-driven system plans to cause breakthroughs in ESG performance. a Brazilian and Italian national and permanent resident of the U.S. She is fluent in Portuguese, English, and Spanish. So with that being said, I am excited to get us started this morning. You know, our topic for today is the new reality of post-pandemic work, evolving risk and strategies. And I will just kick it off by saying, I'm sure my fellow panelists will agree that the new post-pandemic reality in itself is a handful, because we are all looking for the reality of what reality is. I know, you know, for us at Grant Thornton, it has been just probably one of the most dynamic and evolving years. And some of the issues that we started out having a real keen focus on at the beginning of the pandemic are still some of the issues that prevail that we've had to keep an eye to, whether that be matters around working parents, you know, women and their perspective in terms of leaving the workforce, whether that be the mental well-being of our people, whether that be, you know, the financial and technical aspects of our business, risk, things of that nature. And then there are new things that have come up, and there are things that have transitioned along the way. We're going to jump into a lot of that. Alessandra, right before the call, you were saying that today is a really interesting day that a lot of us have our eyes on with the verdict coming out of Minneapolis. And although we might not dive into that deeply, I bring that up because I think it does set the stage for where companies were a year ago, and how, Ellen, you have a strong communications background. You know, we talk about what organizations were really speaking about publicly this time last year versus where they are this time this year, and the impact of that, whether it's risk, whether it's diversity, equity, and inclusion, whether it's in support of ESG. And so with that, I am going to just dive right in to this discussion, and just looking forward to getting both of your perspectives. So I actually just mentioned risk, and I'm going to start out talking about sort of risk identification and mitigation. And so this is a question for both of you. I will, start with you, Ellen, and then Alessandra, come to you. Looking both back and forward in time, what significant risks were identified at the beginning of the pandemic, and what are now identified as we move into a different stage?
Well, thank you, Rashada, for the opportunity to speak. Welcome to Alessandra, to all our guests, and special thanks to our organizer and NACD today. This could not be a timelier topic. I was listening to everybody's bio, my bio and Alessandra's bio this morning, and I was reflecting on the fact that it took about 20 years to change the dress code for women in our industry. And in 1 year, everything about DEI and about flexible work is up for grabs. So tremendous rate of change, tremendous opportunity for all of us this morning. What I'll say in response to your great question, at the outset of the pandemic, and I'm sure our directors who are on the line will appreciate this, there was almost nothing that we didn't perceive as a risk. We had safety concerns, we had liquidity concerns because of the impacts on the general business climate. Obviously, as an oil and gas company, we had tremendous concerns and risk discussions about just carrying out the operations. The oil and gas had to flow, had to get to pipelines, had to get to markets, and how are we going to do that with a workforce that in the case of the office could possibly be remote, but in the case of the field, that wasn't an option. We had very robust, we thought, very well-crafted business continuity plans. And in fact, we had a pandemic plan. We operate in China, so we'd actually several years ago in response to SARS developed a pandemic plan, but it was not in any way, shape, or form appropriate or adequate for the scale of this situation. So we literally got in rooms together as leadership and just started picking the risk issues off. The risks were managed, we thought, shored up over the course of the year. We were able to successfully run the business. But obviously, as time has progressed, there were risks we couldn't address immediately. And there are certainly today emerging risks, which we'll talk about as the whole panel topic implies. But the risks seem and feel a little more social and cultural and workplace oriented. Versus operational and business continuity oriented. We proved that the business could run, the oil could flow, the trains could move. We know we can safely and remotely run the business, but you need people, and you need an engaged, healthy, and energized workforce. And if you normalize even for the fact that people are fatigued by COVID, there's a lot of conversation, as we'll get to today, about what companies are doing to deal with post-pandemic world. And figuring out how to get that part of that risk, attracting, developing, and retaining a workforce right, is going to be huge for this company, for the world. Getting those social, cultural, and flexibilities issues is probably our biggest risk right now post-COVID. That means balancing our culture norms, our employee expectations, and our desire to remain competitive in the sector. That's the work we have underway. Today, I don't come with great answers, but I come with an open mind to hear what other people are doing, because I think it is now a mission critical industry issue, and obviously a mission critical issue for us.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Ellen. And in a minute, you touched on some things around risk that seem more cultural and social. And in a moment, I really want to dig more into that culture piece. Alessandra, I'm going to bring this question to you. So again, looking both back and forward in time, what significant risks were identified at the beginning of the pandemic, and what risks are now identified as we move into a different stage? So how is your company really mitigating the risk associated with the pandemic?
Yeah. So good morning, everyone. Good to be here. I'm looking forward to the debate because, like Ellen said, I think nobody at this point can claim victory and having all the answers. But in our case, and maybe it's similar to many of you, feels like we had 2 or 3 different phases that were almost antagonic with each other. So like the very beginning was similar to what Ellen said. The liquidity, the financial liquidity of our business proved to be very strong. And so, we were on the lucky side of having a strong P&L to cope with the uncertainty, but the financial liquidity was a risk. The physical health of our employees initially was a risk or a concern. We also, our company produced compute storage, so it's a B2B enterprise that sells equipment to essential businesses. So hospitals, right, had to be run or to actually take care of the patient. So at the same time, we needed, I think very similar to many people here, to take care of the physical health of our employees, but we also had to expose some of them to assisting customers. So dealing with that almost like philosophical paradox was a challenge, right? There was also, on top of that, we remember the social unrest that came with the killing of George Floyd. So we were concerned with having social unrest in the homes of our employees, and we had to also lean in to address that risk. So that was kind of the first half of this year that we are living, right? So a lot of concern about even survival, but not per se, but just the risk of having a very unstable operation, a very unstable organization. So that was phase 1, so to speak. Phase 2 was when companies, I think, woke up to the fact that the pandemic was here to stay. And I hope I'm wrong, but this is not the only pandemic we are going to face, right? So that we had to lean in and kind of swallow the pill and try to make a lemonade out of a lemon. And then our demand for our business grew tremendously. So in the same year, the first half, we were stabilizing operation, freezing hires, giving our employees confidence that we're not going to restructure, at least for the first quarter. And then the second half was, we have demand that was unpredictable, and now we have to rush to fulfill it as we run our operation from home. So in terms of the social unrest risk, it's also then other incidents happened. We had also instances of hate crimes against Asian Americans and the Latinx, right? So we had to also have a lot of conversation, and communications as a function element became so critical. It was already before, but I think the communications folks together with the HR folks worked many more hours this year than usual. So I think in addition to everything Ellen said, what was shocking to me is to see the contrast. So come from surviving to thriving in 1 year, and having to be ready for both and more.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Alessandra. And so much of both of what you're saying is really resonating with me when I think about, again, where we started with Grant Thornton is we, at the onset of the pandemic, we had what we call purple chips, which are our strategic priorities. And there are 3 of them. One of them was to take care of our people. The other was to be there for our clients. And the other was to keep our business strong. And in public accounting and auditing, as you can imagine, the heart of our business is really being on site with clients. It's really going through those tangible things and really understanding and taking stock of sort of what's there. And, we just round 1 of tax season, April 15th. And, last year was the first year we ever had to do that partially remote. And our teams are typically used to being together. And it's a very high touch time in our business. And it's also the most, it's the most billable and the most, sort of active and profitable time of our business. And this year we found ourselves doing a completely remote, sort of busy season, as we call it. And it's just, to your points, a new reality. And the piece about taking care of our people is really interesting because it goes back to what both of you are saying, in that it really is, the social, some of the pieces that had not been a part of just the mindset because societally we just weren't there yet. And as we've made that shift and had to look at some of those realities, they're not the soft things anymore. They're not the intangible things anymore that maybe it's a harder line to pull through to see how they, support financial solvency and reputational capital. I think we've all learned in the past year that the very things that we thought might have been the intangibles and the softer side of our business have in fact become some determining factors for just how we show up. And so that takes me to my next question, which is really around culture. And Alessandra, I know being a talent and an HR leader, this is something that, has been on your radar even prior to the pandemic, but now this year and counting into a global pandemic, many organizations are truly realizing that sustained impact to their corporate culture. How has your overall people strategy shifted or changed in direct response from employee feedback? And what are you doing the same or differently to promote a healthy and thriving culture?
Yes, so I totally agree with you in terms of I work in HR for almost 30 years now, and I've never lived a moment in which the business strategy, the risk strategy, the talent strategy are almost like one and the same, and not in a cliche way. It's very real now, right? So with that, even in terms of the value that we place on the mental wellness of our people as a competitive advantage, right? If you have a tired, disengaged, afraid of speaking up workforce, they are not gonna deliver your business, right? So the expectations of what a good culture looks like also evolved, I think, to being even more like virtual, more remote, more agile, more able to deal with uncertainty. So I think that the core tenets of a company's culture don't change that quickly. So I would say things that stay the same for HP were the priority to serve our customers, the environment concerns that we have with the products we put out. So certain very basic, very fundamental tenets to our culture have not changed. But what is changing, what has changed, is the manifestations of the culture, right? Because in my view, at least, culture is an output of several cultural rituals that you put in place and you sustain over time. So we are now redesigning, for instance, the way our employees work is going to be predominantly remote. Like 80% of our workforce will not go back to the office. We made that decision early on because most of our employees are in the technology sector, live in California, very expensive place to live. So we got a lot of questions from our employees in the US, especially on how our longer term solution was going to be, because they wanted to make life-changing decisions early in the pandemic. So we decided together with the board and with the EC that was going to be a huge change for us, that we're going to be predominantly more virtual. And with that, we did not want to have a hybrid model that is very unclear to folks. And I hear quite a few companies talking about a hybrid model, but we wanted to be specific and at the corporate level that we support remote work, that our cultural rituals are going to be remote first, virtual first. And of course, it has to always work for people that are in the office, but it's not the other way around. It's going to be remote first, virtual first, and then we think about how it's going to work for people in the office. Also, the frequency in which our leaders interact with the employees at large increased substantially. So that's another cultural ritual that we strengthened. And just one more example, I know we will talk more, but the focus, the importance of having focus, our employees knowing what they need to work on, what are the priorities for the business, has always been there again. But we used to, have a one-pager strategy and then share that once in a while. But I had to also adapt the way the individual goals and the team goals are more tightly translated from strategy was a bigger change also. So if you work remotely, if you're not interacting with people every day in the office, you need more clarity on what the organization as a whole expects of you. So, that balance of being, safeguarding the culture tenets that we had, but also continue to deliver performance in a more remote way are like the dances that we are trying to, go around with our culture to make sure that we stay a high performance company, even when employees are working from home and in a dispersed manner.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I heard you say, specific and focused and, cultural rituals and norms, and even the frequency by which your leaders are engaging with people. And that all is resonating with me. I actually wrote, it's not a verbatim quote because I was trying to catch it as you were saying it, but you said the tenets of our culture haven't changed. The manifestation of how it comes to life has. And I think that probably rings true for so many of us. And so I just wanted to really repeat that back, and that level of specificity, I think, is something that for those who aren't there yet, many of the directors on the line might have resonated with them too as well, in terms of even, for those who may be going with the hybrid model, the need for specificity and people really wanting to have cultural norms and rituals during this time in particular, because there is so much that's unpredictable and there is so much that they can't really pin down as what a new reality feels like. So Ellen, with that being said, I'm going to bring this question over to you. We're a year and counting into a global pandemic, and how has your overall people strategy shifted or changed in direct response to employee feedback?
Thank you. Alessandra, I really appreciated your answer. I learned a lot, and for the benefit of the group, I'm going to give you almost an opposite answer to the one that Alessandra provided. As a tech company, they've got a different sort of mandate and remit on these issues. ConocoPhillips is a 100-year-old company with a significant portion of our workforce that has and always will, more than likely, work on rotational assignments, in many cases 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, 28 days on, 28 days off. We have field employees who, again, have to get to the field to strap tanks and carry out their business in the operations themselves. And then, of course, we have office personnel. So we have very different ways of work physically with the business, but all of those ways of work for literally 100 years have been organized around very, very strong cultural norms. We call them spirit values. But a big part of those values includes collegiality, celebrating success, being together in collaboration rooms with our technical people working on field projects and other kinds of issues. Our company depends, and a big part of our esprit de corps has been built around face-to-face engagement, literally celebrations, hamburgers and hot dogs on the plaza kinds of things, time with each other, time with each other's families. So this is sort of a worst of all worlds for us on how we navigate a path to the other side. Clearly, we're in the middle of the river. We've left, we're kind of crossing the Rubicon right now, but how do we protect and preserve these really strong cultural attributes while A number of our employees haven't had that experience with our company over the course of the last year and have gotten quite accustomed to working from home or liking the flexibility of working from home and hearing so much about what other companies are doing. So I think there's a push on the part of our leaders and even our board because of our strong culture of being together and solving problems together. I think there is a bit of a push or an appetite to get back to more of an in-person normal, but our employee feedback suggests that some degree of flexibility and something to the left of that kind of ways of work strategy is somewhere between important and essential. There's some urgency to jump out because many companies are already declaring what their post-pandemic workplace flexibility strategies are. So I have to always be thinking about, gosh, I don't want my board and my leadership to feel flat-footed or tone deaf on these kinds of issues. But we're grappling for what's the solution that, if you imagine some Venn diagrams, protect and preserve our culture, recognize that things have changed, what's going to fit in our skin, keep us competitive with industry, but not lose the essence of what we think, and certainly our leadership and board believe are really critical parts of how we work. Our board, of course, went remote, and that's bugging them. I mean, they're anxious to get back together for in-person meetings. Our board likes being together. So we're even trying to figure out how our board works to create, again, some of this operationalization of our culture that is so hands-on. And then, of course, both of you have mentioned it. This was maybe a tangential D&I issue a while ago. It is now a D&I or a DE&I issue. Workplace flexibility is now a DEI issue. So if there wasn't a business case to get this solved and a solution that has to fit appropriately for our culture, there's an urgency around being responsive to the pressures on DEI that are coming at us from every direction. But we're navigating that now, and there's twice as many opinions as there are people we could ask.
Mm-hmm. Great points, Ellen. And, again, the authenticity piece that you bring up, the essence you talk about, really a part of what I heard you say was really being true to who you are as a 100-year-old organization and recognizing what works for you while navigating a landscape of a lot of creativity and noise and all of these other things that, other organizations might be doing, and really staying rooted in those spirit values and being crystal clear about what we can and should be doing, what is great that we're observing that others are doing, but what really will work given our value-based culture and how we're going to bring that to life for the optimal success for our teammates. That's what a lot of what I took away from that. And you all have spirit values. We have clear values, which is an acronym for collaboration, leadership, excellence, agility, respect, and responsibility. So there are 6 values that we're anchored in. And I so love that you talked about the flexibility piece now being a DEI issue, which I would say is a DEI imperative at this point. And it's not just race or gender, it is across the board a DEI imperative. I think one of the things that we've listened and heard from employee feedback is that work-life balance really matters. And at the onset of the pandemic, it was kind of like, where you're not traveling, you're not going anywhere. Clearly, everybody is home and a captive audience. So let's find all these touch points. Let's continue to. And I think what happened in that, not just at Grant Thornton, but across the board, is there was a lot of online fatigue. There was a lot of trying to figure it out, and the mental capacity and space that people really wanted and needed. As we progressed, they started to really become clear that that was a space that they wanted and needed, specifically in the absence of being able to move around more freely and travel and some of those things. And a few things we've done, to that end is really been deliberate. Going back to your point, Alessandra, about specific, we've gotten specific about things like quiet quiet hours, and we're not always able to do it because, again, we do have people who work in different capacities, whether client facing or not. But for example, on Fridays, the end of the day from 2 to 5 p.m., we implement quiet hours just to help people sort of wind down their week. So internally, if possible, sort of no meetings, let folks sort of unwind, manage those administrative things or whatever needs to happen to really get that footing so they can enjoy the quality of their weekends in a way. And we really lean into our clear value of respect on that one. And then the other piece that I'll add and move on to the next question, because there's so many different factors here, is our intentionality about even when we convene. So you talked about more of that high touch with leaders, in embedding and incorporating leaders in some of the discussions that are not traditionally the things that leaders would be talking about. So our culture journey has been really intentional about bringing out the me or the individual in terms of the contribution to community. And we have done sort of milestone moments around topics, and leaders have been really vulnerable and able to share, for example, psychological safety. Next week, we are doing a firm-wide discussion around psychological safety, and our leaders are going to play a big part in that and really help to lead in that. And so that's just one example of how that's coming to life for us. So I want to move. Go ahead, Alessandra.
Just because I love what you and Ellen just said, I will comment on the fact that also the talent is choosy now.
Oh, yeah.
We almost don't have the option to
Yes.
How we want to do this, right? So like Ellen said, like people are watching what others are doing, and some people hated working from home, but many people loved it. And our internal surveys are indicating that they prefer that flexibility than to go back to the office. So even when it's to go back to the office, people want to go once a month, twice a month, also to do different things, not to go there and sit on a desk and do their work, on the computer. So, there are other aspects that are growing in importance because every week, I read these statistics the other day, people on LinkedIn every week are getting about 15, 17 emails with job propositions, every week, 15 to 17 in the US. So we are also leaning in on internal mobility, headhunting our own people internally, as opposed to being here, for our talent to be attacked. So, but from a risk perspective, also, like succession planning became huge. We always did it, but, we did it not, pandemic ready, right? So there are all these other elements of, let's assume we're going to have higher turnover, and let's move our people before someone comes and steals them. Exactly what you said about the Wellness Fridays is how we call it, because our people tend to only take time off when they change jobs. That's, even when they take time off, they're still in a job, their mind doesn't rest, right? So we are forcing these moments in which it's like, we are going to force you to shut down your brain, like just don't think about work, and give time off forcibly almost when people change jobs inside the company. So yeah, I love what you said, and I thought that these are all other cultural shifts as well that I'm seeing related to more emphasis on the old-fashioned job rotation, but now doing it for real at scale.
Yeah, I'm so glad you jumped in and added that, because I think you're spot on. This piece about the talent and people getting to choose. And in the absence of having the norms of society and reality, sometimes the only change or sort of things that they feel like they can control is to just start over in a whole new career and to get that reinvigorated energy about work just to help carry them through the next cycle forward. So I'm really glad that you did jump in, because I think that was so rich and timely. All right, so I want to talk and just shift a little bit now about, and we talked a little bit about this already, but strategic drivers and investments. So focusing for a moment on sort of infrastructure and investments, and you both have talked about this, from an operational standpoint and from a technological standpoint, but can you speak to how some factors like real estate. So we've been talking about like going back into the office and what that looks like. And Ellen, I'm going to start with you on this one. Can you speak to how some factors like real estate, technology, and some of those other infrastructure / strategic drivers might be driving and shaping your vision for the future?
Thank you. I see them less as driving the vision and sort of outcomes or outputs of the decisions that we make. Alessandra will be far more qualified to talk about the technology piece. I think I'm surprised. I think almost everybody in our company is surprised at how quickly we were able to activate technology that allowed us to run our business. And then on top of course, COVID, we had, for example, Winter Storm Uri. I mean, we've tested infrastructure in so many ways across our globe over the course of the last year or so. I think you have to get, you've got to get better. Our board asks us about cybersecurity. And so we're shoring up a lot of those areas in a world that could have a larger remote component of it. But from my point of view, the technology has to enable the flexibility. And if it doesn't work, you fix it. And we've been sort of in that mode. The real estate issue is a little bit trickier. Again, as a large global company, we've got a huge, very extensive real estate portfolio across the world. In some of the Asian countries where we operate, there are local mandates that establish who's in the office or when or what or why people are in the office. So we've got a very, very complex matrix of how we manage real estate. What I found very interesting, and I don't see us, and we own a lot of it, by the way, or it's leased under sort of synthetic structures that are effectively like ownership. So I don't see a huge driver from real estate being an impetus to our decisions. I will say two more things. One is at the outset of the pandemic, before knowing kind of how long this would last, we did jump immediately on retrofitting all of our building space around the world to make it socially distanced and kind of pandemic friendly, whatever. We put protocols in place that my guess is we'll keep for the long term around sanitization and what have you. So we made some immediate global modifications just to make the workplace safe. The other thing that's interesting about real estate, and again, as I've conveyed, we're kind of in the really early stages of grappling with what we're going to do. It's obvious we need to do something. Companies are jumping out. Our employees are clamoring for an answer. But an interesting thing is they want their office. They want to work from home, but they don't want us to touch their office. They want to have the pictures of their kids there. They want their desktop. It's really interesting. They want a place to go. I think a lot of our employees do want to come into the office. And then I think there are employees who want to be able on a day or two to come into the office and have their life in some form or fashion the way it used to be. And they want to co-locate. So we still don't have many people in the building, but there's costs and processes and activity going on to co-locate teams to be able to work when they're in the office. So there's a little bit of cake and eat it too going on. Mm-hmm. I don't want to just have to work at my living room coffee table for the rest of time. I actually want the access to that place that I'm familiar with and that I felt good about. So again, one of the complexities we have is how do we not have huge vacancy factors in our building holding places for people that want to have access to a printer. And that might be part of our sort of negotiating the decision we make on flexibility, part-time flexibility, for example. But it is interesting. People actually here don't want to give up their office.
That is very interesting.
It is interesting. Or their parking space, or their, the gym, the access to the gym. So it will be interesting. I don't, there's a pony in there somewhere. There's a solution in there somewhere, but it is interesting. I think real estate will continue to be a part of our offering. To what extent, it's unclear.
Yeah, I think that is so interesting and just like struck a chord with me. And it's almost like wanting a second home that you don't really occupy except for seasonally. And there's something about a sense of belonging and having a stake in the ground. And again, this sense of like normalcy of still being a part of something that you hopefully want to go away. We've surveyed our employees and, have started to get under that and seeing more who, to your point, do want to go in, but at choice. maybe once a week, maybe a couple of times a month, and really understanding what that experience looks like when they get there and why they want to be there and what they hope to accomplish or how they hope to engage is going to continue to be critical for us. But I love that you brought that up, and it totally resonated with me. And so, Alessandra, I'm going to pose this question to you, then we're actually going to open it up and start to have some discussion with everyone else here on the line today. But just again, strategic drivers and/or investments, focusing on infrastructure and investments for a moment. Can you really speak to how factors like real estate, technology, and even some others may help shape your vision for the future?
So on the real estate part, I will be brief just because I think Ellen covered it so well, that for us, the way that we shaped up the model is that we always had teleworkers, nothing changed for them. There was a big, like 70, 80% of the population that was going to offices every day. But then that population now has shifted to a hybrid model that is not negotiated between line manager and employee. It's a corporate hybrid model, because we were very concerned that if we left it up to different leaders, that their own personal preferences would win, and that would create a divide. And then the people that, for whatever reason, don't go to the office become excluded from promotions, from, just information. So we could not cope with the inequity that would come from that model. So I insist on it because I think for companies that are thinking about how they're going to go about the hybrid model is too vague for people. So you need to have a statement. How is the hybrid going to look like, in my view? And then with that hybrid model that is ours, it's about 80% of the time remote. And it's not on a weekly basis necessarily, it's on a monthly basis. So, you go for a couple of days in a week in a row where you plan to be there with the teams that you work together and would like to meet. So when you are there, you're doing exactly what you said, Rashada, right? You're doing different kinds of work, innovating, ideating, dialoguing about whatever it is that the business requires you to do, not doing your emails, that in activities that you could be doing remotely, you do remotely. And then we are changing the layout of our offices to be places of collaboration, more like large tables, more like large areas for people to interact with each other, as opposed to individual desks. And with that, it comes like that, even when you are in the office, you are going to hook up to technology, because if 80% of the team is there, but there's that 20% that day is not there, virtual first. It's a bit like what we had to go through with websites, right? Before, the websites were made for desktop first, and then we were lucky if they worked on our mobile phones. It's the same now with our employee experience. It's virtual first, and then it works for people in the office as well, not the other way around. But I know there is a question about how to prepare better for the Black Swan kind of events. I think technology is a way, right? Evolving your digital maturity as a business, like no matter which industry you're in. And I swear this is not a plug for tech, but it's just like we saw it, right? This pandemic is not the only one we're going to have to face. And the work is more distributed. The skills that my business needs to win are not only within our workforce. So we need to be able to have these remote virtual rituals that enable people to work together, and that only comes from evolving, I think, the digital maturity of our associates, not only the ones that work in the IT department, everybody. Like we had to retrain our sales force, almost 10,000 people globally that are customer facing, on how to do sales pitches via Zoom, how to use different techniques to kind of engage customers in our solution selling virtually, because it's not even a choice for us. The customers don't want to meet in person. They want to be able to procure their technology infrastructure without meeting anyone. They want to do it online. So, if I would say a way for us to lean in and be more ready to face risks or uncertainty even, right? That these are things that we don't know what they are, but we know they are going to come our way, is to make the whole organization more data savvy, more technology savvy, more independent of presence, to actually continue to grow the business. I feel strongly that that's a huge underutilized lever that we have at our disposal.
Yeah, I mean, so many good nuggets in there. And I love the equity of that corporate decision for how people work versus leaving it up to those individual, managers that you said, again, their perspective might be the one that wins. And then it creates an inequity of experience, which creates an imbalance in the culture, which creates a bigger matter to contend with later.